All right, good afternoon, everybody. So tomorrow is a day that's called Pesach Sheni, and in the Bible, it's a real big deal that it was a second chance, and the Talmud discusses this as well. That if somebody in the Bible is the Book of Numbers, and the Talmud is in Pesachim, if somebody in other places throughout the Talmud, if someone did not have the opportunity the first time to celebrate Pesach in its proper time, it's such a thing as a Pesach Sheni. And what do you mean by celebrate Pesach? Meaning you would do on the first Pesach, you do everything that we do today, Pesach. The only thing that was done Pesach Sheni that wouldn't be done the first Pesach is that you would have the Korban Pesach. You'd have the Paschal sacrifice. And there's a discussion about King Hezekiah when he pushed off Passover a month later. Was that Pesach? Was it Pesach Sheni? That we don't have time to get into. And it was a controversial thing that he did, and we talked about King Hezekiah, about Chizkiyahu Melech today in our first video today. But I wanted to talk instead about Pesach Sheni B'zman Hazeh, the observance of the second Passover today. First thing I think we have to make clear is that if Mashiach came today, we would not bring a Pesach Sheni because there was no Pesach Rishon. Now, how does that interact with this issue that we spoke about with Chizkiyahu Melech, with King Hezekiah? Again, we're going to put that aside for now. We're not going to talk about that. And there's a whole machlokas about that, but in the end, the way we paskin is that no, we're not bringing Korban Pesach tomorrow because we didn't bring it first time. And the Pesach Rishon is a whole machlekes whether or not it could be Baba Tumah or not, could come in the state of Tumah or not, or this and that. Anyway, we're not talking about that. And also there are other issues why even the same Mashiach would come right now, and Beis HaMikdash would come down, built from Shemayim, like Rashi says. Still, there's a lot of other issues there, Tumah and all other things. I'd always say that Pesach Rishon could be Baba Tumah. I'm not going to talk about that. The real reason I'm bringing this up is I got an email from a Choshev Bacher, someone who's a Rav in this community. He's a Heter Haroy, a Smicha. He's an ordained rabbi and serves as I don't think currently serves, but at some time in his life served as a communal rabbi, kind of like me. I'm not currently a chief senior rabbi in the synagogue. I'm not a community rabbi, but I used to be, right? And I'm a member of a synagogue where I provide some rabbinical services, but it's mostly I'm not really a senior rabbi, although I'm a chaplain and I do other things. Anyway, this bacher asked me, I don't mean to embarrass him or anything, it just I was a little surprised by this, because he learned in good yeshivas and everything. I remember one time it was Yom Kippur fell on Shabbos, and I got a call from a man who really wants to be frum. He kind of grew up frum, but he really by no fault of his own, he became a Reform rabbi. A very interesting story. He was a Holocaust survivor, and he came to America as a young man, and he settled with his uncle in Cincinnati when he was a refugee coming in from the war. And his uncle asked, "What do you want to do for a living? Where should I send you to school?" He said, "Well, I want to be a rabbi." He said, "Well, it's perfect. In Cincinnati, we have the rabbinical college here." and he was brought up strictly Orthodox, but he was actually the partisans, all kinds of things as a teenager, and he wound up being a Reform rabbi, but he really wanted to do things the right way. And he called me before Yom Kippur to ask, how should he be Makabel Shabbos early, Erev Yom Kippur, so he could make Kiddush, and then fast Yom Kippur, and it's a very good kasha. It's a very good question, but we don't do it because the way we paskin zich is that we, when you makabel Shabbos, you makabel Yom Kippur, you'd be makabel the tainas. If you accept you can accept the Sabbath early, and you can extend it late. But the question is once you do that, so is it Yom Kippur already? Do you have to fast when Yom Kippur falls on Shabbos? And the answer is yes. So even though it is a dispute, but this is how we approach it. And so we're only accepting Yom Kippur a few minutes early, maybe, and not an hour early. Let's say you're allowed to accept Shabbos upon yourself, about the hour and a half early. Depends on the time of the year and how we calculate what's called Plag Mincha. And this whole question about what that means, and hour and 20 minutes early, something like that, hour and 15 minutes early. So, and people tend to do that in the summertime. They like to make early Shabbos, so they can eat well it's, they don't wind up eating at 10 o'clock at night. By the Hasidim, usually they don't do that, but personally, I'm a little lazy, I'll say, and so I tend to like to make early Shabbos myself. Anyway, even though when I was younger I hated it, and now I have a family and everything, if I'm not Makabel Shabbos early, it means I'm sitting all by myself. It's not even my wife and I, it's just me. So that's the only, everybody would be asleep already if we're eating at 10 o'clock at night, Anyway, so it's just a similar type of a question that I would, that's at least, but this, I'm just shocked and amazed that this bocher is asking me if there's any Isser Malacha, if there's any prohibition to do labor that's forbidden on a holiday tomorrow, Pesach Sheni. And the answer is, of course, no. It's a regular day. It's not a yontiv. It wasn't a yontiv for the average person when the temple stood. It was only a shtickle, like a shtickle yontiv, like a cholamoyed type of a yontiv, for the person who was makriv the korban Pesach. Meaning, just like, meaning mistama, if we know from Chazal that people wore different clothing on Shabbos than during the week, just like we do now. How do we know that? Because it says a shoramud l'shabbasis, einamud l'chol, that an ox that is wont to gore someone on the Sabbath is not wont to gore on the weekday. And just like we wear Big Day Shabbos on Chol Hamoed, or Purim, things like that. And I would assume probably something like that. So Sheva Brachas, these types of things. Most likely, that's how it was in the old days. Meaning, not everybody would wear Shabbos clothes on Pesach Sheni. But the person who was bringing Korban Pesach, he would wear Shabbos clothes. The person who was bringing the sacrifice of the second Passover, he would wear his Sabbath clothes most likely, and he would have like similar rules like Chol Hamoed, and he would have the chiyuv of saying Hallel, which the rest of us don't have. and when the way that we observe some of these days it can be confusing and really has to be explained. And people have to be aware of the halachic ramifications, the difference between the legal aspects, and I won't even use the word minhag, because minhag, that's a big deal, a custom, but rather a term I prefer to use is hanhagos. Hanhagos tovos, practices that certain communities have, local practices. And even with these local practices, people have to approach it in the proper manner and not get confused, because this is not an obligation. This is something that we do because we feel like it, the kind of thing. We want to have creative ways of serving God based on biblical precedents and Talmudic precedents, but it's not the holiness of the day that there is neither in a biblical holiday nor in a rabbinical holiday. Even though Pesach Sheni is a day that the Bible sets aside for something special, it's not a holiday. It's not even a holiday like Hanukkah or Purim. It's really just a normal day. And an example that I will give is that in certain communities, particularly in Verms, the custom was to say Tachanun on these days. Pesach Sheni, a lot of people hold that you should say Tachanun. Excuse me. Meaning there's certain prayers, a certain liturgy that we only say on weekdays, and if it's like a little bit of a holiday, we tend to skip it. And and by Hasidim, often it depends on the community, but if it's a Rebbe's yard site, particularly if it's a yard site that a lot of people will make a pilgrimage for, it's that big of a yard site, we might skip Tachanun, that type of thing, but it's not really, halachically speaking, there's really not an obligation to say Tachanun as much as there's a very strong good reason to say Tachanun every day. And my rabbi, our local Rav, he likes to give like an example of a sin that it's like saying Tachanun on Shabbos, that's like a ridiculous type of sin, So, in that sense, when it comes to these issues, it's the fact of the matter was, in Verms, for example, they said Tachanun whenever there was any reason to say Tachanun, because at one point in their history it was a very big community, and there would be a bris pretty much every day, or a pidyon ben, or a chasen, or a shever brachas, or whatever there was. So halachically they would never have an opportunity to say Tachanun. So if it would happen that there wasn't a bris or something like that on let's say Lag Bomer or Tu B'Shvat, or even like the last days of Nisan after Pesach, after Isru Chag, even the Isru Chag itself, all these days, they'd say Tachanun, because it was like a weird thing to say Tachanun because they never said Tachanun. But then the community got smaller after there was different pogroms and things, and they still kept this, even though they were saying Tachanun every day. They didn't have as many brisin and chasnas and so forth, but still they would say Tachanun on these types of days. So that shows that, and I don't think even Pesach Sheni is even on that list of days that that most people won't say Tachanun, and they did, because it's very common. There are many communities where they actually say Tachanun, but the whole idea of Tachanun is more of a minhag than a chiyuv. It's more of a custom than an obligation. Rav Avadia Yosef brings this in a tshuva. The shaila was in the responsum that there, according to his opinion, it's very problematic to recite Shemona Esrei before Neitzachama, to recite the standing Amidah prayer, the main liturgy, before sunrise. And what if, in the winter time, you have a minyan where if you're gonna, they have to be finished by a certain time because people have to get to work. It has to finish, So by skipping Tachanun, they either have to daven early and daven Shemona Esrei before Nates, which most people say is okay, at least b'diavad. Which is more b'diavad? Is it more b'diavad? Is it more post facto to recite Tachanun, to skip Tachanun, or to recite Shemona Esrei before Nates? And Rav Avadia says it's better to skip Tachanun and not say, if it means that you have to say Shemona Esrei. If it's a question between saying Shemona Esrei before Nates or not, it's better to skip Tachanun. And then, the truth is, you could say Tachanun later, or different things, especially if there's still like a minyan left, because especially with the Sephardim, there's, Vidoy and the Midas. So anyway, but that's my point, meaning, do I still celebrate the Pesach Sheni? Of course, and I make a tish, and I do all these things. Eat a little matzah, maybe even eat maror if there's leftover maror. Have a whole suda. I think Samarov even had kremslach and chveis. What other things? Knedlach and things like that. So it's a nice thing to do, but it's not an obligation. It's a devotional practice, somewhat like celebrating a yard site or something like this. If you feel like doing it, you feel inspired to do something like this, it's a nice thing to do. It's a fun thing to do. It's a way to feel close to God. But it's not a mitzvah. It's not even a minhag. It's not an obligation. It's a shayna zach. And if for some reason you can't do it, sag dich nicht. Don't worry about it. It's not that important, And so yes, we embrace these ideas of this day and the inspiration and the musar and so forth, but it's not that important. We can, you're not doing something wrong if you don't eat matzah tomorrow. If you want to do it, you're able to do it. It's a nice thing to do. If you can't do it, don't worry about it. That type of thing, Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment, and certainly you could do malacha or whatever on Pesach Sheni and Lag B'Omer and all these things. I know the Chassam Sofer was against celebrating Lag B'Omer altogether because he felt like it was, people making up a yontiv that was unnecessary, and there's something true to that, So, thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment, and we'll see you all later. All right.